The courtroom filled again. Everyone took their seats. The judge looked serious. The jury had watched the videos. They had listened to Jordan's testimony. Now, it was time. The room felt heavy. Even breathing seemed loud. Trey sat beside his lawyer, his hands shaking just a little. His mother held her breath, gripping the edge of her seat. Jordan sat in the back, calm on the outside, but his heart was pounding. He had done all he could. Now, the rest was out of his hands. The judge turned to the jury. "Have you reached a decision?" The jury foreman stood. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." Silence. Trey closed his eyes. The foreman opened a folded paper. He looked at Trey, and then he spoke. "We find the defendant not guilty." The words echoed through the room. Trey's mother gasped, tears falling instantly. Trey sat frozen for a second. Then he broke down. He covered his face, crying. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. The courtroom, once cold and quiet, was now full of soft claps and quiet sighs of relief. Jordan didn't clap. He just smiled, a quiet, proud smile. Brian Matthews, the prosecutor, sat in silence. His face red, his case destroyed. He had laughed at the beginning. He wasn't laughing now. Jordan stood and walked over to Trey. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're free now," Jordan said softly. "But remember, freedom is not the end. It's the beginning." Trey nodded, still crying. "I'll never forget what you did for me." Jordan's voice was calm. "Then promise me one thing." Trey looked up. "Someday, when you see someone who's alone, you stand for them too." As Trey and his mother hugged, the judge spoke again. "This courtroom is dismissed." The gavel hit the bench. But this wasn't just the end of a trial. It was the beginning of something bigger. Justice had been served, and a promise had been honored. The courtroom was empty now. But Brian Matthews, the prosecutor, sat alone at the table, his hands folded, his face pale. The sound of people leaving echoed faintly behind him. He didn't move, didn't pack his files, didn't even reach for his briefcase. He just sat, still, defeated. Jordan noticed. He walked over, slow and steady. Brian didn't look up. Finally he whispered, "You embarrassed me in there." Jordan raised an eyebrow. "No," he said. "The truth embarrassed you." Brian looked at him, angry at first, but then his eyes dropped. There was no fight left in him. "I thought he was just another kid trying to lie his way out," Brian muttered. "Didn't even check the video footage. I just assumed." Jordan didn't speak right away. Then he said softly, "Assumptions put innocent people in prison. Or worse, in graves." Brian's jaw tightened. Jordan leaned closer. "You had power, and you used it carelessly." Brian finally looked at him, shame in his eyes. "I used to believe in justice," he said, "but I got lazy. I stopped looking." Jordan nodded. "And this time, you got looked at." Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered around Trey and his mother. Cameras flashed. Microphones pushed forward. "Are you going to sue the city?" one asked. "Do you feel like justice was served?" Another shouted. Trey didn't speak. He just held his mom's hand tightly. Jordan stepped between them and the crowd. "No more questions today," he said firmly. "They've been through enough." The reporters backed off. Slowly, Jordan turned to Trey. "You don't owe the world your pain. Heal first, speak later." Trey nodded. Back inside, Brian finally stood up. He walked toward Jordan one last time. "Why did you come?" he asked. "You're a Secret Service agent. This wasn't your job." Jordan looked him dead in the eyes. "Because I remember what it felt like to be laughed at when you're innocent." He paused. "Justice isn't just paperwork. It's personal." Brian had no reply, just silence. Weeks passed. The trial was over. The city moved on. But for Trey and his mother, life would never be the same again. He had been called a criminal, laughed at, judged by his skin, not his story. But now, he walked, free, not just from court, but from fear. People in the neighborhood stopped him in the street. "You're that kid from the news, right? You stood your ground. You had someone powerful behind you." Trey always answered the same way. "Yeah, his name's Jordan." At home, Trey placed a small photo on his desk. It was the news photo. Jordan standing beside him, calm, strong, proud. Next to it, Trey placed a new notebook. On the front, he had written, "I want to be like him." He had made up his mind. One day, he would study law. One day, he'd fight for someone else. One day, he'd be the one walking into a courtroom, changing lives. Across town, Jordan sat in his quiet office. No cameras, no applause, just a man and his memory. He opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo. 2 kids. One of them was him. The other, his little brother, Marcus. He whispered, "We did it, Marcus. I kept my promise." On the wall behind him hung a plaque. Service, justice, integrity. But to Jordan, justice wasn't a word on a wall. It was action. It was showing up. It was standing between pain and power. And for one boy named Trey, Jordan had become more than an agent. He had become a symbol, a quiet hero. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is not wear a badge. It's to use it to protect someone who's never had one. And that's what Jordan Cole did. He didn't just win a case. He changed a life. And maybe that's how real legacies are made. It was a bright morning at New York International Airport. The airport was busy, full of people going on trips, some smiling, some tired. Children ran with little backpacks. Flight announcements echoed in the air. In the middle of this busy place, a well-dressed black family walked toward Gate 42. They looked calm and proud. Mr. Carter wore a black suit and carried a small leather bag. Mrs. Carter wore a simple blue dress and held her daughter's hand. The son walked beside his father, holding a tablet. They were not loud, they were not flashy, but something about them made people turn and look. They had dignity. The boarding call began. First-class passengers for Flight 878 to Los Angeles, please come forward. The Carter family stepped ahead. Some people in the line looked at them. One woman raised her eyebrow. Another whispered to her husband. First class. The Carter family heard the whispers, but kept walking. They showed their tickets. The gate agent smiled politely. Welcome aboard. Inside the plane, the family placed their bags in the overhead bins and sat down in the first-class cabin. Mr. Carter sat by the window, his son beside him. Across the aisle, Mrs. Carter and their daughter sat together. They were early. The seats were soft and wide. Everything looked perfect, but just a few minutes later, she arrived. Linda, the flight attendant, a white woman in her 40s, hair tied up tight, lips pressed together, eyes sharp. She saw the Carter family and paused for a second. Then she walked up slowly. She didn't smile. She didn't say welcome. She just stared. "Excuse me," she said to Mr. Carter. "Can I see your tickets again?" Mr. Carter raised his eyebrows, but stayed calm. "Of course," he said. He pulled out the tickets and handed them over. Linda stared at them, then looked at the seats, then back at the family. "These are first-class seats." "Yes," said Mr. Carter. "We know." Linda forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "All right then," she said, handing the tickets back. But as she walked away, she muttered under her breath, "Must be a mistake somewhere." The son, Jordan, looked up at his dad. Why did she ask again? Didn't she already see the tickets? Mr. Carter smiled at him gently. Some people see things with their eyes, he said. Not their hearts. Jordan didn't understand yet, but his mother gave her husband a quiet, proud look. The plane began to fill. Other first-class passengers came in, mostly businessmen in suits, an elderly couple, and one young celebrity wearing sunglasses. They all looked at the Carter family, at least once. Some smiled politely, some didn't smile at all. Linda returned to serve drinks. She offered orange juice and champagne to others, but she walked past the Carter family without asking them. Mrs. Carter raised her hand politely. Excuse me? May we get some water, please? Linda didn't even look back. In a moment, she said coldly. Jordan looked down at his tablet and tapped the screen. He had started recording. Little Maya, the daughter, whispered to her mom, "Why is she not nice to us?" Mrs. Carter held her hand and whispered back, "Sometimes people forget how to treat others. But we won't forget who we are." A woman in the next row leaned over. She was blonde, in her 50s, wearing gold jewelry. "Don't take it personally," she whispered. "Some of these flight attendants think they own the sky." She gave a small smile and offered Maya a candy. Mrs. Carter nodded in thanks, but Linda saw the exchange and narrowed her eyes. She walked to the back of the plane and spoke to another attendant. "They're already causing trouble," she said. "I bet they use points or a giveaway. No way they paid for those seats." The other attendant looked uncomfortable. They haven't done anything wrong. But Linda didn't listen. "I've been on this job for 15 years. I know who belongs and who doesn't." What she didn't know was someone else was listening. An old man in a grey suit sat quietly near the back of first class. He wore glasses, had a notebook in his hand. He watched everything. He didn't speak. He just observed. And when Linda walked past him again, he made a small note in his book, a few rows behind. Jordan kept recording on his tablet. He didn't understand everything, but he knew it wasn't fair. Mr. Carter looked out the window, calm but silent. His hand gently touched the inside of his jacket pocket. Inside it was something important, a letter, a secret. He looked at his wife across the aisle. She nodded. The secret wasn't just about the tickets. It was about who they really were. And soon, everyone would know. The plane was now flying high in the sky. Soft lights glowed, and the hum of the engines filled the cabin. But the atmosphere in the first-class section was tense. The Carter family sat quietly, trying to enjoy the flight. Mrs. Carter looked at her husband and whispered, "I don't like how Linda is treating us." Mr. Carter nodded slowly. "Neither do I. But sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand." Jordan, the son, kept his tablet hidden. He was still recording everything. His fingers trembled slightly as he tapped the screen. Maya, the little girl, sat close to her mother and asked softly, "Mama, why don't they smile at us like the others?" Mrs. Carter took a deep breath and smiled gently. "Sometimes, Maya, people forget to be kind. But we must always remember to be kind anyway." Nearby, Linda was busy talking to another flight attendant. "Did you see how they asked for water? Like they think they deserve it. They don't even belong here." Her voice was loud enough for some passengers to hear. The woman in the row behind the Carters frowned. She leaned closer to her husband and whispered, "That's not right. They're guests like everyone else." Linda ignored the comments and continued to serve other passengers with extra care. She handed champagne to the businessman across the aisle, smiled brightly and said, "Would you like some more?" But she didn't even glance at the Carter family. Mrs. Carter raised her hand again. "Excuse me, could we have some blankets? It's cold here." Linda turned sharply and said, "We only have so many. If you want, I can check later. Jordan's eyes filled with sadness. He looked up at his father, who gave him a reassuring nod. Passengers started noticing the difference in treatment. A young woman in first class whispered to her friend, "Did you see that? They're being ignored." Her friend shook her head. "It's not right. Everyone should be treated the same, no matter who they are." The Carters tried to stay calm. They didn't want to cause trouble, but the whispers around them grew louder. Some people looked at them with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. Jordan couldn't hold back anymore. He pressed the record button on his tablet and whispered, "This is not fair." His voice was small, but strong. He showed the video to Maya and said, "One day, everyone will see what really happened." Maya nodded, gripping her mother's hand tightly. Meanwhile, the old man in the grey suit sat quietly watching everything. His eyes followed Linda as she moved around the cabin. He noticed the cold looks, the whispered comments, and the ignored requests. He pulled out his phone and typed a message quickly. Suddenly, the plane's intercom buzzed. Linda's voice came on, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will soon begin our meal service. Please make your selections from the menu." She handed menus to the other passengers. But when she reached the Carter family, she hesitated. Then, without saying a word, she handed the menus down the row to the passengers behind them. Mrs. Carter looked surprised, but didn't say anything. Jordan's fingers were ready to record again. Mrs. Carter finally spoke softly. "This is not just about us. It's about respect." Mr. Carter smiled sadly. "You're right, but respect is something people must learn." Jordan looked out the window. He saw the clouds drifting by and thought, "One day, they will see." Suddenly, a young woman sitting across from the Carters spoke quietly. "I think you're very brave. I'm sorry you have to go through this." Mrs. Carter smiled at her. "Thanks. We try to teach our children to be strong and kind, even when things are hard." The woman nodded. "If you need anything, just ask." Linda saw the exchange from the aisle. Her face tightened. She turned away quickly and whispered to herself, "They don't belong here. They don't belong anywhere like this." Back in the cockpit, the captain noticed the tension in the cabin. He sighed quietly. He knew this was more than just a flight. The old man in the grey suit finally stood up and walked toward the back of the plane. He stopped near Linda and said quietly, "You should treat every passenger with respect." Linda turned, surprised. "And who are you?" He smiled softly. "Someone who believes in fairness." Linda looked away, feeling uncomfortable. Back in her seat, Mrs. Carter whispered to Mr. Carter, "I hope things will change." Mr. Carter nodded. "They will. Change always comes." Jordan smiled a little and whispered to his sister, "Hold on, Maya. The world is watching." Maya looked at him, eyes wide. The plane flew on, but the story was far from over. The whispers and looks had only just begun. The flight moved steadily through the sky. Outside the windows, the sun began to set, painting the clouds with soft pink and orange colors. Inside the cabin, a quiet tension filled the air. The Carter family sat in their seats, trying to ignore the cold looks and whispers around them. But there was one man who noticed everything. He was an older gentleman, dressed in a sharp grey suit. His hair was silver, his eyes calm and serious behind his glasses. He didn't say much. He just watched. This man, Mr. Reynolds, had been flying on this airline for years. He was not just a passenger. He was someone very important, one of the top managers of the company. From his seat near the back of first class, Mr. Reynolds saw Linda, the flight attendant. He watched how she treated the Carters, ignoring their requests, giving them cold looks. He saw the way she whispered to the other attendants, saying things that made his heart heavy. But Mr. Reynolds didn't want to jump to conclusions. He decided to watch more. Mr. Reynolds took out his small notebook. He wrote quietly, "Passenger treatment unfair. Flight 878, first class. Carter family ignored." He looked over at the Carters. Mrs. Carter smiled politely at a flight attendant, who quickly looked away. Mr. Carter sat tall and calm, holding his wife's hand. Jordan was recording the whole time, with his tablet, quietly capturing the unfairness. Maya looked worried, hiding her face in her mother's lap. Suddenly, Linda came toward Mr. Reynolds' seat. She smiled sharply, trying to hide her nervousness. "Is there anything I can get for you, sir?" Mr. Reynolds smiled gently, but said firmly, "Thank you, but I'm more interested in the service you are giving the Carters." Linda's smile disappeared. "The Carters? What about them?" Mr. Reynolds looked her in the eyes. "Have you been ignoring their requests?" Linda hesitated. "They haven't been difficult." Mr. Reynolds shook his head slowly. "Ignoring someone's requests is exactly what it is." Linda turned away quickly and walked down the aisle. Mr. Reynolds sighed and wrote in his notebook again, "Flight attendant denies bias, but evidence shows otherwise." Later, Mr. Reynolds used his phone to quietly call someone. "We need to check. Flight 878, he said. "I want full reports on passenger treatment and a review of the flight attendant's behavior." Meanwhile, the Carters stayed quiet, trying not to disturb the flight. But Jordan showed his mother the videos he recorded. Mrs. Carter watched the screen carefully. She said softly, "Jordan, you are brave. This video will help us. One day, the truth will be known." The atmosphere in the cabin started to change. Passengers whispered among themselves. Some were angry at the way Linda treated the family. Others were confused, wondering why the flight attendant was so cold. Mr. Reynolds looked around and noticed something else. The passengers were beginning to pay attention. The whispers were louder. The stares were more frequent. People were watching to see what would happen next. Back at her station, Linda felt the pressure. Her heart raced. She had worked for the airline for many years. She believed she knew what the company stood for. But now she felt uncertain. Who were the Carters really? She wondered. Suddenly, the plane shook with a small bump. A warning of turbulence ahead. The captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we expect some turbulence soon. Please fasten your seatbelts." The passengers tightened their belts. Mr. Reynolds stood up and walked slowly toward the front of the cabin. He stopped near the Carters. He smiled kindly at Mr. Carter. "I am Mr. Reynolds," he said. "I want you to know I am watching, and I promise, your story matters." Mr. Carter nodded, surprised but grateful. "Thank you." As the plane entered the turbulence zone, the lights flickered. Passengers gasped and held onto their seats. Linda looked frightened. She moved toward the kitchen to hide, but the Carter family stood up. Mr. Carter helped an elderly woman who looked scared. Mrs. Carter comforted a crying baby. Jordan and Maya helped pick up things that fell from the overhead bins. Passengers began to see the true heart of the Carters. It was not about money or status. It was about kindness and courage. When the turbulence ended, the entire cabin burst into applause. The Carters smiled, holding hands tightly. Mr. Reynolds watched quietly, impressed. The plane shook suddenly, a strong jolt that made everyone grab their armrests. Passengers gasped and murmured nervously. Outside, dark clouds rolled in. The captain's voice came over the speaker again, calm but firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. We are expecting turbulence ahead." Linda, the flight attendant, hurried down the aisle, trying to stay calm. Her hands shook slightly as she checked that passengers were buckled. But inside, She felt scared. She had never felt this way before. On a flight, her eyes darted nervously. Meanwhile, the Carter family stayed calm. Mr. Carter held Maya's hand tightly, whispering soothing words. Mrs. Carter pulled Jordan close, whispering, "Stay strong, my son. We will get through this." The children looked scared, but trusted their parents. Suddenly, a loud noise came from the overhead bins. A suitcase fell to the floor, and a woman screamed. People bumped into each other. The cabin was chaos. Linda panicked. She rushed to the back of the plane and hid near the kitchen door. She was afraid of the chaos. But the Carters did something different. Mr. Carter stood up first. He moved through the shaking plane, helping a woman who looked dizzy. "Hold my arm," he said softly. "You're safe." Mrs. Carter helped a crying baby, soothing it with gentle words. Jordan and Maya moved quickly, helping passengers pick up fallen bags and toys. Passengers watched silently, amazed. They saw the Carter family acting with kindness and calm. A woman near the aisle whispered, "Look at them, helping others, even in fear." The young man beside her nodded. "This is true strength." Linda peeked out from the kitchen. Her face was pale. She watched the family she had treated so coldly. She felt shame. The turbulence lasted a few more minutes. When the plane finally steadied, the cabin was quiet. Then, slowly, applause started. One passenger clapped, then another. Soon the entire first-class cabin was clapping. The Carters smiled, but didn't stand up. They stayed humble. Mr. Carter whispered to his wife, "Kindness is stronger than fear." Mrs. Carter nodded. Linda walked slowly back to her station. Her head was bowed. She was silent. The other flight attendants looked at her, surprised. At that moment, the captain came out of the cockpit. He walked straight to the Carter family. His face was warm and friendly. He said, "Thank you all for your calm and help during the turbulence." He looked at Linda and then back at the family. "This flight has been special." Passengers started talking softly among themselves. They felt a new respect for the Carter family. Some whispered, "They belong here," more than anyone else. Others nodded in agreement. Linda sat down, feeling small and quiet. Her eyes were filled with regret. Mr. Reynolds, the old man in the grey suit, smiled. He knew something big was about to happen. He reached into his pocket and took out a small card. It was a phone number. He dialed. Back in her seat, Mrs. Carter whispered to her husband, "I feel like this is just the beginning." Mr. Carter nodded. "Yes, the real story is yet to be told." Jordan looked at his mother. "I'm ready to show the truth." The plane flew on into the sunset. The Carters were no longer just passengers. They were the center of attention. The plane was slowly preparing to land. Passengers fastened their seatbelts and returned to their seats. The atmosphere was quieter now, but the tension still lingered. The Carter family sat calmly, looking out the windows. They knew something important was about to happen. Mr. Reynolds, the older man in the grey suit, quietly stood up and made his way to the front of the plane. He stopped next to the captain and whispered something. The captain nodded and smiled. Meanwhile, Linda, the flight attendant, was sitting near the back. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap. Her face showed worry and regret. She glanced at the Carter family. Her thoughts were racing. The plane touched the runway smoothly. As it slowed, the captain's voice came over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Los Angeles. We hope you had a safe flight." He paused for a moment, then said, "Before you leave the plane, I have an important announcement." Everyone in first class looked up. Mr. Reynolds stood at the front with a small smile. He said, "This flight has been a lesson for all of us." He looked directly at Linda. Mistakes were made today. Some passengers were treated unfairly, and that is not how this airline operates. Passengers gasped quietly. Then Mr. Reynolds turned to the Carter family. The Carters are not just any passengers. They are owners of this airline. Everyone stared. Linda's mouth opened in shock. Her eyes filled with tears. Owners? Mr. Reynolds nodded. Yes, the Carter family owns this airline. They have worked hard for years to build it. The passengers looked at the Carters with new respect. Mrs. Carter smiled gently. We only wanted to fly quietly, like everyone else. But today, we learned about kindness and respect. Mr. Carter continued, and we hope this story helps others to see beyond skin color and status. Linda stood up slowly. Her voice was soft but strong. I am sorry. I was wrong to treat you this way. I will learn and do better. The cabin was silent. Mr. Reynolds nodded proudly. This is the change we want. To treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are. Passengers began to clap softly. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Jordan smiled and showed his tablet to his mother. The videos he had made would tell the whole story. As the passengers stood up to leave, many came to shake hands with. The Carters stepped out of the plane into the busy airport. Cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and passengers from the flight stood nearby. The story of their flight was now everywhere. Mrs. Carter smiled softly as reporters asked questions. How did you feel during the flight? She replied. It was hard at times, but we stayed calm and kind. Mr. Carter added. We wanted to show that kindness is stronger than hate. Jordan held his tablet tightly. Reporters wanted to see his videos. He played the clips showing the unfair treatment and the courage of his family. The videos quickly went viral on social media. People around the world watched and shared the story. Many were shocked by Linda's behavior. Many were inspired by the Carters' calm strength. Linda watched the news with tears in her eyes. She felt ashamed, but also hopeful. She had called the airline's office to apologize. She wanted to change. The airline's CEO gave a public statement. We do not tolerate discrimination. We are grateful to the Carters for showing us the way. We promise to train all our staff to be kind and respectful. Back at home, the Carters received thousands of messages. People sent letters, emails, and gifts. A young boy wrote, You taught me to be brave and kind. An elderly woman wrote, Your story gave me hope. The family felt proud but humble. Mrs. Carter said, Our story is not just ours. It belongs to everyone who believes in respect. Mr. Carter smiled. And it will keep growing. Jordan posted one last video. He said, Never be afraid to stand for what is right. And always remember, kindness wins. The story had started on a flight, but now it was changing hearts everywhere. Days passed since the Carters' flight. Their story was still everywhere. People talked about it on TV, online, and in their homes. It was no longer just a story about one flight. It was a story about respect, kindness, and change. Linda, the flight attendant, returned to work. But something was different. She had taken special training about respect and fairness. She was determined to be better. Her friends noticed. One said, Linda, you seem different now. Linda smiled softly. I want to be better. The airline also changed. New rules were made. Staff learned how to treat every passenger with kindness. Mr. Reynolds, the old man in the grey suit, became a leader in the company's new plan. The Carters were invited to many events. They spoke about their experience and how kindness helped them. Mrs. Carter said, Kindness is a choice. Mr. Carter added, Even in hard times, kindness can shine. Jordan and Maya smiled as they listened. One day, the family was invited to the airline's new headquarters. The CEO shook their hands and said, Thank you for teaching us. Mrs. Carter looked around and said, This is a new beginning. The story had come full circle. From pain and hurt to hope and change. Jordan looked at his mother and whispered, "We made a difference." Mrs. Carter hugged him tightly. "Yes, my son. Together, we made the world a little better." The plane flew again, but this time, the flight was filled with respect. Kindness was in every seat, and everyone was treated like family.